Hello friends, welcome to Edwiki Learning channel. Please do subscribe to get more updates on the DevOps concepts. This is the part of the full course Python API development training program. Please do check the description below to get the link for the complete course details. Without further delay, let's get into the video. Thank you. Welcome back team and welcome to the Python API development training program, and this is the program where we are here to learn a Python, right? And yes, as I see it in the chart window, learning the Python is easy, but problem solving is really tricky. I understand, but where you get the problem solving skills, that's something that you have to build by yourself, and that's the individual thought process, I believe, correct? I meant to say, getting the problem solving skill is depends on the thought process. How are you thinking about the problem, right? So how are you approaching the problem, right? So how are you breaking down the problem it into multiple small pieces and planning the things out? So that is the individual skill, how you are actually approaching the problem to solve it, right? That's not something that you learn it somewhere else usually. Of course, you get it by doing some practice, but that's not something that you go and directly learn somewhere, right? Though you get some tips, but still you have to build that by yourself by doing some practices and improve the thought processes, right? That's how the learning process will be there. Agree, guys? Well, so I'm here to go over with the Python as a scripting or as a programming language, and that helps you to uh, think how we can use this into problem solving in the real time. Okay, and yeah, the next question would be, if you have, definitely you might have been tried Python somewhere, right? Maybe in your academic or wherever, or in general, you know that any programming or Python, if you get into the learning mode, I think the sessions will start from, hey, a equal to 10, b equal to 20, right? C equal to a plus b, correct? No, I think that's where you usually get started with any programming language. Maybe say yes or no in the chat window, or you don't want to answer if you want, right? And at least for me, right, at least for me, it's very confusing now. Why a equal to 10, why b equal to 20, why c equal to a plus 10, right? And I used to get a lot of questions that, right, hey, we know 10 plus 20 is 30, why do I need to worry about a equal to b equal to c equal to all these things? Then I mean to say, for everyone, whoever is learning the programming from the day one, right, by looking into this a equal 10, b equal 20 kind of, we don't imagine or we don't understand how this programming is helping in the real time, how this is working in the real time, what is that we do exactly in the real time as a job, correct? We don't understand all this because that a equal to 10 is not explaining anything how it is being used to really solve a real time problem. I think most of us are get stuck there only, because most of the training programs are, if you are learning by yourself, right? Hey, I want to learn Python, you get into the Python and the day one class is like all, hey, variables a equal to 10, b equal to 10 to, you print the 20, yes, the class is done. Okay, you don't understand anything except a equal to, you go to the second day of session, and again you spend some time with patience, and again it will be something like, this time maybe a string or something else. So by the third day, you think that I know what's happening, but I don't know why the Python is in use, where it is used, right? You lose the track of or interest, right? Because it takes some time for you to get into the final stage to understand how exactly Python is being used in the real time. And we can't travel all the days to reach to that level because of losing the interest, because it's all about some ABCD kind of thing. right? I think I don't want to go into that a equal to 10 model from the day one to get started with my Python classes at least. So I wanted to go in a different approach to learn the Python here, guys. Usually, if you know the end goal that, hey, this is what I'm trying to get finally, probably you get more interest as well, right? Rather putting a suspense there and we don't know what is that we are learning, why we are learning here, how this is being helpful in later. Without knowing all this, probably sometimes tricky, especially to the programming languages. So hence the reason I'll get start with some context today. Maybe I feel like this definitely helps you guys. Okay, and at least to me, right, learning the Python, don't put more focus on syntax, on how to write a code. Rather, put focus on the approach. Put focus on understanding the problem. Put focus on breaking down the problem it into multiple pieces. Do you think the code is involved in order to understand the problem, right? Breaking the problem into number of small problems, right? Understanding in general or thinking about the problem in general, what is the solution that we are looking for? This is not a programming, right? This is just a general skill that you need to put to, to see how, what is that we are looking for here, right? Once you go into this approach, right, in general, then probably we'll look into the code later, correct? Of course, right, nowadays the code is being developed by your chat GPT, Copilot so easily. So if you know what is that the problem, what is the solution that you are looking for, how to approach to that problem, sometimes if the problem is very big, how to break that into small pieces, if you know that, probably you can just go and ask your chat GPT that, hey, this is what I'm looking for, can you give me the code? You will get a code in a seconds of time. You just need some skill to understand the code at least, right? What that code is doing. Maybe the people are not writing the code from scratch nowadays, but at least should have a skill to understand what's happening. So what I'm trying to write, so rather putting more focus on syntax, of course that is important, just try to see at overall what's happening and right how to approach the things to write a Python program. So I'll go in that direction, guys. So I feel that direction will help us to learn Python in an easy manner rather, right, in a difficult way. Well, so let's see how that goes, and I expect you guys are interacting with me over the chat window, keep posting me some feedbacks, right, and any questions or concerns, right? And yes, let me get into the world now. So sounds interesting, exciting. Well, so I'll get started with this introduction. And again, I don't want to go in who has invented the Python and when the Python is developed, in which year the Python is developed. I don't want all these, right? Uh, no one care about that in general. But yeah, if you are interested on about that history, you can just go and get that history from the Google, yeah, Wikipedia pages, right? So I'll definitely focus on something valuable, guys, some, not in uh, the generic statements, right? Well, so when it comes to the coding part, right, usually there are two different styles of coding, right? So we call it as a compiling languages or the programming languages, and right. So usually the programming in the sense or the programming languages like a Java as an example, right? So the programming languages like a Java, C, C hash, C++, right? So those are falling under the programming languages category. So the programming languages, right? Let's say this is the small piece of Java code. Okay. So if you're writing the small piece of Java code like this, whatever you see it in the screen, you don't need to understand the code, but this is a small piece of Java code, right? So if you're writing the Java code like that, if you want to use this code, if you want to execute this code to get output, right? So you can't use this source code as is, right? So this code has to be compiled. So the compile or the build both are kind of the same meaning, right? So this code has to be compiled or the code has to be built. When you compile the code, right, then it actually creates the you know uh, uh, the byte formatted output. You see here the 0 and 1s and all. So the actual source code, which is in an English format for your readability, that code is actually converted it into the byte format, that is called as a binary format or byte code format. Once the source code is once the human readable source code converted into the bytecode format by doing the compilation process, then this bytecode format, this binary or this library, different different words are there based on the type of the program. Maybe if it is a Java, right? Once we build whatever the bytecode formatted output that is generated, we can call it as a library, right? So once we get this library, then we need to execute this library to get output usually. That's where we need to run this library. We need to execute this library. We need to execute this artifact, the different terms. So that's where finally you get output. So here I'm not really interested on what kind of the output or what the program is doing. So my goal is here just to explain that usually if you're writing any code, the code has to go for the compilation process that creates the bytecode format, and then you need to run. There are two steps here, guys. The step one, you compile. The step two, you execute it. Then you will get output based on for what purpose that you have written a program. So basically these are the programming languages and the compilation type of languages, right? Mostly we use these programming languages to write a very complicated softwares, right? Very heavy applications, complicated softwares, some desktop softwares, so on so on. The other end, there is a scripting language, right? The scripting languages are actually kind of a Python, a JavaScript, right? So those are the scripting languages. So these languages will be falling under the interpreter languages category. So what does it mean, right? If you are writing the Python program, you see here, this is a small piece of Python program. So if you are writing the code in the Python, then you don't need to do these two steps, guys. So you don't need to do compilation separately, then executing or running the code separately. So you take the code, you execute it, or you run the program. That's it. You run the code. When you run the code, when you run the code, that internally take care of doing the compilation plus running. When it comes to the programming languages, when it comes to a Java as an example, right, the two steps are there, right? Those two steps are now happening as one single steps internally automatically for you. You don't need to worry about running two commands or two steps to first compile then run. So you just execute the code, you execute this Python scripting, and it actually interpret the source code, a human readable source code, it into the bytecode format and execute it, and you get output. Everything happen in one run itself. That's how the difference will be there between the formatted compilation kind of programming languages and the interpretation languages. Mostly the scripting languages all fall under the interpretation, and the programming languages will be like a compilation, right? So that's how it works. Okay. And usually if you want to run the program, right, once you have the program is ready, and if you want to run the program, you need a Python software, right? So definitely now you need to download, install a Python software in your machine where you are actually executing the Python program. So when you install the Python program, the Python software will actually bring a Python virtual machine, PVM. So the Python virtual machine is just a concept within your Python software. You are not really dealing with the Python virtual machines directly. That's one concept within the Python software that you are installing, right? The PVN, which is within the Python, right, will now be responsible to run this Python program, maybe converting that into the understandable machine code format, executing that. There's a whole backend stuff will be done internally, right? So as I said, so converting the source code it into the bytecode format, and then the converting that bytecode format it into the machine understandable format, executing that whole stuff is happening automatically, right? When you just execute the code, we don't need to worry about multiple steps here. When it comes to the Java kind of a programming languages, right? Usually you need to install JRE software. The JRE software is basically gives the Java virtual machine internally. So this JRE software is help us to execute the library, right? Because we can't execute the source code directly. The source code is now compiled and then you need to run. So JRE is the software that actually helps to run the bytecode formatted Java code or the library. JDK is one other software, Java Development Kit. The JDK software will help us to do the compilation. So when it comes to the programming languages like a Java, first you need to install the JDK software that helps to do the compilation process and give the output. Then you need a JRE software which will help us to execute this code and give the output. But when it comes to the Python, we don't need to have two different steps. Just install the Python software, right? And write a code, give the code to the Python. It just take care of doing everything behind the screen and you get an output, guys, right? So these are the two different models of the coding side of world, right? So definitely Python is got more popular because of the nature of how it can work. You don't need to worry about compilation, running all these things, right? So it can run directly and all this bytecode format happening behind the screen. That's one advantage, at least from the developer's perspective, right? And it's easy to develop as well because we are writing it in the source code format and it actually interpreted in the backend. So during the development time, you get some advantages that we see when we are getting into the coding perspective. But yeah, so this slide I just wanted to talk about that what's the difference between, right, the scripting languages and programming languages, and the difference between compilation and the interpretation. The one good thing with Python is Python will help us as a scripting. Usually the scripting in the sense to write a code for very small tasks, right? Simple automation, simple products, simple application. The programming languages will be used for very complex applications, very big softwares, right? Desktop softwares, apps. That's how it works. The good thing with Python is Python works for both actually. And the Python I can use as a scripting language to solve certain automation problem. Python I can even use as like a programming language to build some very complex applications as well. That's how it works. Yeah. So I just want to give a small quick info about these. Now let me come to this slide, guys. Why and where the Python is being used exactly. You all know, right? The Python is being used in everywhere nowadays. So just to recap the things that Python is using in the web development to develop the web applications. Python is being used in the data science technology. Python is used in the research technology, artificial intelligence, right, and machine learnings, DevOps, automation, system administrator, right? So there are different places where the Python is being used in a differently, right? So maybe how we are using Python in the data science, how we are using Python in the machine learning, how we are using in the artificial intelligence space or in the web development space, there will be slight difference definitely in sector to sector, right? Or correct. But here we'll focus how we are using Python to the context of development space, which will be helping to the DevOps teams as well, right? So let me take one specific use case now to understand more where the Python is being used and how it is used and some of the key terminologies before we get into the coding part. As I said, right, I don't want to go and talk about a equal to 10 again, right? Before we get into that stage, let's see what the Python is all about, where it is being used, okay? So I think that you might be already having some of the basic skills about the uh, maybe maybe applications. If not as well, no problem. I'll try to go over with the some basic terminologies. So the use case that I'm taking here to understand, right? Let's say I have a user who is actually wanted to browse a website on the browser, correct? Uh, you see here, I'm just opening one online shopping portal website. Here, this is a Walmart, portal, right? So let's say the end customer, the end user, is planning to purchase a product, correct? I'm just trying to connect my Python with the business use case, okay? So let's say the end customer is actually going to the browser, to the internet browser, and hitting this Walmart website, and he able to see that Walmart page. So basically, the what user will do? User will click on register option, will register an account, sign in option, sign into the account. Then obviously he will search for the product. He will get some lot of suggestions there. He click on the product, read the description, add the product to the cart, right? And then go with the payment process. Order is created, track the order. Finally, your order will be delivered, right? That's how the typical workflow, what's happening here. So beyond that, probably sometimes you may need to go back and edit your profile, update your passwords, update your contact information, correct? Those type of things also will be doing. Sometimes you may be going to your website and maybe deleting something. Maybe you add a product as a to the cart today, right? Later on you don't want, right? What do? You go and delete that product from the cart, right? So basically, user, whenever they are utilizing or using this type of web application, right, knowingly or unknowingly, of course you are just browsing this website, but pretty much what you are doing, you are creating some content or you are creating some request to the servers by registering a application or account. Sometimes you are sending the delete request, hey, delete this value. Sometimes you are updating, hey, I want to change my password, so please change my password from existing to the current. So basically you are doing some operations right on the website based on your need, correct? How that is happening exactly? So whenever you as a customer going to the web browser and hitting that Walmart URL, the website, so typically the request is going to the server, correct? Obviously the server is the responsible guy to give the response back to you, right? So let's say I have a server where it is running with a Angular JS application, okay? So I'm not going with the infrastructure here, guys, because how the request come to the server where the Angular JS code is running. In between, some load balancing, other things will be there, which is not in the scope of discussion, right? So let's say I have a server. I have a server where the Angular JS code is running, executed. So the request will go to that server. Hey, someone is looking for this website. Now this Angular JS application will take the request. Okay, you want to see the website. Okay, let me give the response. So this Angular JS will give the response. That response will actually give you the web page like this. So far, so good. The Angular JS code is actually more popular in terms of giving you a graphical user interface kind of application to get UI user interface, right? The so to get these colors, tabs, right, and very good animated product images, something like that. If you are looking for this kind of UI page, right? So Angular is great, which actually focus on the UI type of application development. So whenever you hit the website, the request is went to the AngularJS server, which we call it as a web server. The web server will now respond back to you and give you the website. So far, so good. The next step, what is that you are doing? You probably go and click on register, then try to register your account, right? Whenever you are registering an account, you need to fill up the details like your name, email, contact, password, correct? And mobile, and click on submit. So when you are clicking on submit, pretty much all the data that you filled in the form, correct? All the data that you filled in the form, that data is now sending to the AngularJS server saying that, hey, user wanted to register an account and these are the details that the user has sent. Once the details are given to the AngularJS, what AngularJS has to do? So typically the details has to be stored somewhere, right? Whatever the details that you entered in the form, right? All the details now should be saved in somewhere in the hard drive, correct? Because tomorrow if you want to log in again by giving a username and password, how it know that the given credentials are correct? Again, it has to compare with what was saved yesterday when you created an account and what is that you are supplying today. Is that matching? Then you are allowed, or else your password is wrong, correct? So where it is actually saving those records, right? So here, in order to save the data or the records that you have been submitted in the form, right? I'm taking the help of MySQL database. MySQL is the one of the popular database software. This database software will help us to store the data in the actual hard drives. There will be now a number of different other alternatives, guys, but I don't want to get into all of them. I'm just going with one typical simple flow. It could be AngularJS or it could be a Node.js, it could be any other, but I'm taking one example, and it could be MySQL, it could be Solar, it could be PostgreSQL, it could be MongoDB. Again, there are different database softwares that are out there which will be helping us to store the data into the actual hard drives. Any database is fine or any web server is fine. So here the thing is, the AngularJS is not a very good software or very good application which can directly put your data into the MySQL databases. Angular is great in terms of giving you a beautiful UI, but to store the data into the backend database, right? In between, I need one other server. So this is where the Python is coming into the picture, right? So what I'm doing, right? I'll write a Python code that is now acting as a server, that is now working as a server, right? So now the front end AngularJS application is actually contacting or requesting the Python application, right? Hey Python application, I got the details from the user that user wanted to register an account. These are the details that user has filled in the form, right? And I received the details. So you take these details and put that into the database or put that into your backend DB where the data has to be saved. So now the front-end application, which is the AngularJS in this case, is actually sending the request to the Python application, right? Python code. Wherever the Python code is running, executing, that's where I'm calling it as a Python application, right? Then the Python application take the request, right? And then that Python application will be connecting to the MySQL application saying that, hey, I received some data. So can you store this data to me? That data will now be stored into the actual hard drives, right, by your MySQL softwares. And that's how the overall flow will be there. So in this flow, the AngularJS, I'm calling it as a front-end application, and the Python application, I'm calling it as a back-end application, and MySQL, I'm calling it as a database. Of course, back-end database. So if you look into this typical flow, right, sometimes we can call this as a three-tier architecture as well, because there are three different layers are there to fulfill your user's request, right? The user is trying to access a website and register a user in backend, right? The front end AngularJS is helping to give you the beautiful graphical UI. Python application is helping to take the request and putting into the databases, and database is to actually store the data. So there are three layers, which we call it as a three-tier architecture. Good. Now, so this Python, right? That's where I'm trying to put more focus, right? So the Python application is not being called by the end customers directly. Help me guys in the chat window. If you closely look at this flow, right? Whoever is trying to get a graphical user interface kind of a web page in the browser, that guy is not hitting, not calling, not requesting your Python application directly here, correct? The end customer is actually hitting the front-end application. Hey, give me the website. He never worry about the Python or MySQL, any other things. But the Python is backend. So here the Python code, the Python application that you are writing here, right? That is actually acting as like a RESTful API. So the Python application that I'm running there, the Python code that I'm running there, that is acting as like a RESTful API. What is RESTful API? RESTful API, REST API kind of same, right? So why I'm calling this as a RESTful API, okay? So the RESTful API is the terminology that we usually use. The RESTful API says that that is just a application, that is just a application. That application is actually in the backend. That application is not directly interacting with the end customers who are is looking for my UI. No, right? This RESTful API is there as a backend application, which actually works through some REST principles. So REST principles in the sense there are certain rules and terms are there how my application should work. So any application, any code that you are writing, right? Any application, any code that you are writing, if that is following the REST principles, the REST has some guidelines, right? Hey, these are the specific guidelines that you need to follow. If you are following these guidelines, then you are working as a RESTful application. If you are not following the REST guidelines, then no, you are not a API. Something like this. I'll talk about that REST principles as well. So let's say here I have written a Python code and my Python code is running there. My Python code is actually following the REST guidelines. My Python code is actually following the REST guidelines, REST principles. Hence the reason this I'm calling it as a RESTful API. So in general, this RESTful API can be a Python, can be a Java, can be any other, doesn't matter. It's up to your choice. What kind of the programming language that you need to choose to build a RESTful API. Anything is fine. Based on the complexity, based on the use case, you may need to see which programming language will makes more easy for me to write. And here we are uh, taking Python to write a RESTful API to build a code that follows the REST principles to make this happen. So being said that, maybe confirm me in the chat window, guys. Now, rather me using the terminology called Python application, Python code, can I use this? So the end user is trying to get an web UI and the request is sent over to the front end. The front end is calling the backend RESTful APIs. Is it the right terminology, guys? Right? The front end is calling the backend RESTful APIs. The RESTful API is just a high level term, right? Whichever the application, whichever the code that is following some standards and working, that's called as a RESTful API. I'm just trying to slowly move towards the developer terminologies, nothing else. And the RESTful API is calling the backend database, and finally your data is stored over there. Some of you may be experiencing this now, right? Oh, this is Python course and we are dealing about something else. Yes, we need this flow to understand what's happening, right? Without that, we can't directly get into the coding and start writing a equal to 10. No, at least to me, this is the best way to learn understanding the use cases. Now, when the user who is actually browsing my website on the browser, right? That guy is called as a client. I'm just giving the terminologies. What does it mean by client and the server, right? So anyone who is requesting or clients, anyone who is accepting the request and giving the response called as a server, right? So here I have the end client who is actually trying to get a website, right? So this guy is sending the request to the front end web server, right? So usually the client and the server should be in a mutual understanding, right? Let's say if you and me are talking each other, if we both are talking each other, definitely first one person has to initiate a communication, correct? Maybe let's say if I am initiating a connection, if I am initiating a communication saying that, hey, how are you doing? Then I will become the client because I initiated a connection. You become the server because you are accepting my initial connection request and responding it back to me saying that, okay, I'm good, correct? So I'm the client, you are the server. So the client is a term that says who is actually initiating the request. Server is the term who are actually responding to that request. When the client and the server are in communication, when both parties are in a communication, there should be some rules in place, right? How they can communicate each other, correct? Let's say if you and me having some code language, which others cannot understand, right? If we are having some code language, we should know how the code language works. Then whatever I am speaking, you should understand. Whatever you are speaking, I can understand, right? That means some rules will be there, how we can communicate each other, which technically we call it as a protocol, right? So the protocol is the term that says that some set of rules by following which rules, if the client, sorry, by following which rules, by following which protocol, client and the server can be communicated. If both parties know what are the rules, what are the protocols, then it's easy for them to communicate. Or else I will be speaking a different language. You don't know what that is, and you will be speaking different language. I don't know what it is. So that's not the right way of communication. So here in this world, the client who is browsing the website on the internet browser is sending the request to the Angular, which is the front-end application. Then obviously these two parties should be understanding each other what's happening. HTTP, hypertext markup language. HTTP is the protocol name. The protocol follows certain standards, some rules, how the parties can be communicated. So the client is actually sending the request to the server by following the HTTP protocol, by following the HTTP rules. Of course, we don't need to know what is this HTTP rules and all. Usually, if you keenly observe in the website, when you are trying to browse the website, right, you usually go to http:// something, right? That means the browser by default following the HTTP rules and sending your request to the server behind the screen. But as a technical person, we should know that HTTP is the protocol that the client and the server is following to understand what's happening. And good. So as I said, right, whoever is actually requesting for the website is called as a client, and whoever is actually receiving that request and sending the response back to them is called as a server. And in this case, this AngularJS, I'm calling it as a web server. Now I just wanted to use one statement now. The clients are sending the request to the web servers, and the web servers are actually routing the request to the backend RESTful APIs, and the RESTful APIs are actually connecting to the databases. Is that the right statement, guys? I'm slowly changing my terms towards the development mode, nothing else. This is not Apache HTTPD, guys. Apache HTTPD is a software. No, I'm not dealing about Apache HTTPD here. HTTP is the protocol rules that the client and the server is following. Now, let me come to this critical part. So I'm saying that the client is the one who is requesting for the website, and Angular is acting as a web server now to give the response back to the client. Good. Can I call the web server as a client, as this web server is now initiating a connection to my RESTful API? From RESTful API standpoint, can I say that the web server is actually a client? Just for understanding the terminologies. Obviously, right? From web server standpoint, whoever is requesting my website, that guy is actually a client. But from RESTful API standpoint, the web server is actually a client, because the web server is actually initiating a connection, sending the request to the RESTful API, and definitely this guy will become the client and RESTful API will now become the server. That's the terminology changes now. Can I say that the web server, in this case, the web server is actually sending a input to the RESTful API application, which is actually a Python code in this case, right? And the RESTful API is now taking this input, the input that it received from the client, right? The RESTful API is taking that input, and Python code will do something with that code. Sorry, the Python code will do something with that input and give the output back to the client, saying that, hey, I received your input, I processed your input, and this is the output that you get it. That's what it is expected, right? Agree with me? The client is sending something to the server. The server will take it up, do something, give the response back. So rather me saying input, maybe let me change the terminology a little more better, request. So can I say that the client is actually sending a request to the RESTful API application. The RESTful API application is now sending the response back to the client. I think this terminology is a little better, right, than input and output. So when the client is sending a request to the RESTful API server, help me guys in the chat window, what kind of the request it is? What is that this client, what is this web server client is requesting my REST API? Can I say that, the end client is actually hitting the register tab in the browser and filling the form there and filling the username, password, email ID, so on, so on, right? And clicking on submit button, correct? So the data that you entered in the form, that is the data that is now sending to the RESTful API as a request asking for please store this data into the databases, correct? What the client is asking my server? The client is asking that, hey, I received the data from my user. Can you please save this data into my backend database? That's the request. If that is the request, definitely the data that it is passing to my RESTful API, what kind of the data it is? When it comes to the data, it can be a number. Maybe if the user is entering a mobile number there, probably that is a number. If the user is giving a name, probably that is a string. So the data that the client is passing to the server, the data can be of different type. The data can be a integer when it is in the number format. The data can be a string if this is alphanumerical format. Most of the times the name, email ID, address, all those are kind of a string. Why? That is not a numerical format, right? That is alphanumerical format. So that means the client can send the data to the server. The data can be in a different type. The data can be a integer, the data can be a string, the data can be in a Boolean format, the data can be in a list format, the data can be a dictionary, data can be a tuple, so on, so on, so on, so on. As of now, at least we know what is integer, what is string, because that's easy to understand. Integer is a number, string is a alpha numerical formatted data, correct? But when it comes to the technical, there will be few more different type of the high level data structures, which we call it as list, dictionary, or whatever it is. But what I'm trying to put together here is when the client is sending the request to the server, the request can be in a different data type. I'm calling all these together as a data type. I'm just listing some of the important data types here, not everything, just for understanding purpose, right? So I'm using the terminology called data types here. That means the client is sending the data by following any of the data type that I mentioned here to the server, asking that, hey, I'm sending this data. The data is in the integer type or string type or whatever it is. Please store this data into the backend database. Sometimes when the client is sending the data to the server, asking that, hey, please put that data into the backend database, the data can be complicated sometimes. if the user is clicking on the register tab and filling the form, maybe that's quite easy, right? Just the matter of sending the name, password, email ID, mobile number. That's it, right? So easy. Sometimes the user is filling the very big form, which is little complicated. We need to send a lot of data to the server, right? So to handle that type of the data, maybe a simple integer type, simple string type may not be enough. We need to have little complicated, or we need to have a proper way to format my data. Maybe forget about this Python. Just come to your general scenario. If I ask you that, hey, please save this data, what do? Now your next thing is, should I use Notepad in my Windows laptop to save this data? Should I use Excel sheet? Should I use Microsoft Word? Should I use any other different formats? Correct? You can pretty much you can save the data everywhere, correct? But you take a choice based on the type of the criticality or the complexity of the data. You decide which format makes holds good, correct? Do you think the Notepad is great for all the use cases? No, right? Notepad may be good if you are just putting some 10 lines of data. Maybe if you are putting the data in the data which is in numbers, which requires some mathematical calculations, probably it's better to put the data into the Excel, because that allows you to do some calculations when it is in the rows and column format, correct? If the data is something related to the structuring, probably it makes more good if you are putting that data into the Word format, correct? So now correlating to here, whenever you are getting some data from the client, right? Sometimes a simple integer format is good. Sometimes a simple string is good. When the data is little complicated, probably we need to have a different other methods how we can format the data. So some of the important the data formatting tools are, the data can be in a CSV format, the data can be in a JSON format, the data can be in a XML format. Nothing new here. How you know that the data can be a Word format, the data can be a PDF format, the data can be a Excel format, the data can be a Notepad format, correct? That's how you know that the different formats, how the data can be stored in your general purpose home purpose laptops, right? Similarly, when it comes to the business, the data can be in a JSON format. The JSON has its own structure. It has its own rules, how the data can be saved. XML has its own format rules, how the data can be. CSV has its own rules, how the data can be. So basically the CSV, JSON, XML are great to format the data if the data has very big. If my data is just a mobile number, I don't need to worry about all this. But when it has a significant larger text, probably we need to work with all of this. We'll definitely see how the data can be in a JSON format, XML format, whatever it is. But for now, at overall, can I use this statement? When the client is trying to do something on the website, the request is made to the web server by sending some data. The data can be in a JSON, can be in a XML, can be in a CSV, can be a simple integer, can be a simple string, or can be in a list, dictionary, tuple, correct? It can be any format of the data, right? So hence the reason, rather me putting all these different data types and big chunk of discussion there, simply I just wanted to use a simple terminology that the HTTP request body. What is request body here? This is just a developer wording, guys, nothing else. What does it mean? We know that the client and the servers are in communication by following the HTTP protocol rules. Okay. And we know that the client is sending a request to the server. Okay. We know that the client is sending the data to the server, right? Rather saying the integer data or string data or JSON data, we are just using the high level term called request body. So now my terminology is the client is actually sending the request to the web servers. The web servers are sending the request body to the RESTful APIs. What is request body? Request body means the data in a specific format. Are we good with this? And why I'm calling it as a HTTP request body? Because the request body is sending by following the HTTP rules or HTTP protocols. The request body can be a JSON, request body can be a XML, request body can be a simple integer, doesn't matter. When the client is sending a request body to the RESTful API asking that, hey, please take this data and put into a database. Now the next question is, what is that we need to do with this data? It's not like always the RESTful API is storing the data into the database, right? It depends on what the client is looking for. Who is client here? The client is the one who is actually accessing my website, correct? The end client. If the end client is going and clicking on register tab and filling the form, click on submit, then probably the data has to be stored in the database. When the client is going to reset password and give the new password, what kind of the data it is, guys? Then probably already there is a password in the database, already there is a password saved in the hard drives. Probably now I need to go and override that, correct? I need to patch that, correct? I need to update that. Hey, already there is some data, that's the old value. Remove that and add in new data because user is resetting a password, correct? Let's say the end client is going to the cart and deleting the product, saying that, hey, I don't want this, please delete it. Then it has to, the request again come saying that, hey, this is the product, please remove it from cart. The RESTful API has to delete that from the database. Okay, don't keep it in the cart. That's the delete. So the problem here is not a problem. When the client is sending some request body to the RESTful API, the client should also tell what to do with this request body, correct? So that is called as a HTTP request methods. There are some HTTP request methods that are following in standard. Get is the request type. Get is the request type. The get request type is all about, hey, please give me the data what is out there already. Post is the request type that says that please add the data to the database. Delete is the request type that says please delete this data from the database. Patch is the request type which says please update the existing data. Put is the request type which is also to update the existing data, but usually put is like completely remove the previous value and put the new value. Patch is like not the complete data, some data let it be remains same, some data please override with my new value. That is called as a patching. So these are the few popular request types. When the client is sending the request body to the RESTful API, the client should also tell the request type. Is this get? Is this post? Is this delete? So on so on. Then the RESTful API will understand it. Okay, I got the request body, which is actually the data format. Okay, I got the post type. That means I need to load this data to the database. Accordingly, it will do. Now, what is your role here? When you are writing the Python program, which is now acting as a RESTful API, the Python program should understand the incoming request body and understand the type of the request. Accordingly, your code should do the necessary action. Then it has to give the response back. All these get, post, delete, patch, put, right? All these combiningly, we call it as a CRUD operation. CRUD. C means create, R means read, U means update, D means delete. Mostly these are the couple of operations that you do on the database, right? Either you create or read, update or delete. Once the server gets this request body and the one of the CRUD operation, then it will perform that action and finally give the response. That response is now called as a HTTP response body. Correct? When the RESTful API is giving the response also should be in the type of in any different data type, right? Or the data format. So I'm calling it as a response body. Important to understand that, first of all, why I'm calling this as a RESTful API. This is just a Python code, right? Can I call every Python code is a RESTful API? No. You write some 10 lines of Python code. Do I call that as a RESTful API code? No. Right? Not every Python code, not every program will become the RESTful API. RESTful API is the terminology that we use whenever you are writing the Python program by following the REST principles. REST says, hey, these are the some standards that your application should follow, then only it will be a RESTful API. What are those? Your Python program should work, your Python program should work by following the HTTP request. If someone has to connect with you, they have to connect via any one of these request methods. Then only your program will run. That is one mandatory requirement to make this as a RESTful API. Should be get, post, or delete, whatever. Also, your RESTful API will not be saving any information with you. Whatever the work that the client is have with you, the client's responsibility to send every information to you what is that is looking for. The client has to send you the data, the client has to send you the type of the data, the client has to send you what kind of the request it is. Everything whatever is needed to perform the logic should be sent by the client only. The server, the RESTful API is not holding any information right within the server level. So that is a one other principle that the application should maintain. Then it is a RESTful API. I mean to say, sometimes you can write a Python program saying that no, hey, already have some information with me, already I'm storing some data with me, you please ask whatever you wanted to, then I'll perform the action because I have the data with me. No, that is not a RESTful API. RESTful API in the sense the client has to send every information whatever is needed or looking for. The server will just take the request, process it, give the response back. It will not save anything in its within the server. Hence the call. These are called as a stateless services. Probably now, at least whoever know already some DevOps concepts will understand what is it mean by the stateless terminology here. So in general, the stateless application in the sense the application which is actually not storing any data within the server. It just receive the request, process the request, store the data into somewhere else, in this case MySQL database, and done. Give the response back. It is not saving anything there. So if you're writing a Python application that actually follows the stateless behavior, if you're writing the Python program that actually receive the request by following the HTTP request methods, any of the CRUD methods, those applications are called as a RESTful APIs. Now you are here to understand how to write a Python program. Now tell me guys, what will be in real time? Where do you use Python, right? What will be your role in as a Python developer? There will be many again, but to this context, right? You are writing the Python program. Your program should be able to receive the request body and the request methods. Your Python should be able to process that request body, the data that you received, and do necessary action on the backend database. That is the major goal of this RESTful APIs here. If then, okay, if then, I think my slide is end with this. If then, if I ask you now, hey, the end client is actually clicking on register tab and filling the form and clicking on submit. Okay, the web servers are actually sending the request body. The request body includes the name, mobile address, the password, username. This is the data that you are receiving in the request body. The request type is POST post. That means your Python program should able to take the request body and save the data into the database. Now I'll ask you, hey developer, can you please write a Python program for me? Your program should do this. Are you getting the use case here, guys? Right? So, hey Python developer, can you write a Python code? Your Python code should work as a RESTful API. Now you know what does it mean by RESTful API? Should work as a RESTful API. Your Python code should take the request body, which has name, email ID, so on, so on, and please do this. If you want to get started with writing the program now, what is the first thing that you should be familiar with? To me, the first thing that I need to understand is, the very first thing that I need to understand here to start writing the Python program, the data type, correct? What kind of the data that I'm getting in? That's my first thing. Am I getting the data, the input data in an integer format? Is it in a string format? Is it in a JSON format? Is it in what kind of the format that I'm receiving as a request? That is my first thing. Once I know that the incoming data is coming in the integer format or a string format, then I know how to handle that, how to store it. That's the next part. Obviously, right? So forget about this Python again. If I tell you that, hey, there is some data in the system, please take the data and please do some calculation. What is that your interest now? You are now interested to know the data is in Excel, is in Word, or is in where? How it is, in which format? Then we can think of how easy or difficult it is to process it, correct? If I give you the data which is in the number format in the Excel format, what do you feel? Oh, it's so easy for me to do the calculation because it's already there in the Excel format, which is the numbering format. I can just do some operation. It's easy. But what is the case if I give the same numbers in the notepad format? Do you feel comfortable? No, right? You now struggle enough to do some calculations on the data because you are receiving the data in the notepad format and it's not compatible for you to do some operations directly, right? Probably you need to put now efforts to convert the data from the notepad format to the Excel format because you feel comfortable doing the calculations on the Excel if it is in a number format, right? So that means any developer, or at least to my perspective, if you're writing the code, the very first thing that I'm interested is what kind of the data that I'm receiving, what is my request body. That's what is more focus point. Once you know what is the request body, what kind of the data that you are getting, then the next step is how to handle that. Maybe say agree or disagree in the chat window. Being said that, these are the key approach, or this is the approach how you need to get started with your writing your code, guys. I would say whenever you start writing the Python program, the first thing is, right, what is the request type? Is it post call, get call, delete call? What is that I need to do with the data? Obviously we need to know that first. The second is, what is this request body? What is the input data type? Is it integer? Is it string? Is it JSON? As I said, list, dictionary, so on, so on, so on, so on. That's the next thing. The third is very important here. The third is parsing or transforming the request body. What does it mean by parsing or transforming? Sometimes you may get the input data type in a different format, but you need a different format. You got me? The client will not give you the data in a format that you are looking for, correct? The client may give you the data in a different format. You may be expecting the data to be in a different format to make it more easy for doing the calculation. Then there is a mismatch. Sometime back I said already, right? Let's say I will give you the number data in the notepad file. What is that you are expecting? You are expecting the data will be in a Excel format so that it's easy for the computation. But you have not received the data in the Excel, you got it in the notepad file. What is that is now needed? Can you directly go and do the logic there? No. Probably you need to transform the data. Okay, I received the data in the notepad format. No, I need it in Excel format. Let me do the transformation. You convert the data from the given data type to the desired data type. Maybe in this non-technical example, you convert the notepad data it into the Excel format, then you perform your actual business logic, correct? That's more easy. So here also, sometimes you may get the data in an integer, but you may need a string. You convert the integer data type into the string data type. Sometimes you may get an input as string. Maybe you need an integer. You convert that into an integer, something like this. So at a high level, what I'm trying to say, right? The client is sending you some data in a specific data type, but to make it more easy to process the data, your Python code may be expecting in a different format. That's where you need to put some transformation logic in place to deal with the data, convert the data, handle the data. All these different things happen. Once you convert the data or transform the data it into the desired data type format, right, then the next step is compute the logic. That's where you actually implement the logic. The logic could be sum operation, subtract operation, or loading the data it into the database, or whatever it is, business purpose. Once that is done, now you return the response. Okay, I'm done with this data. This is the response, and give the response back to the client. Could be a success response, could be a failure response, it doesn't matter. Whatever you have done in the Python program, just tell to the client that, hey, you given me the data and I have done with the data handling, and I loaded the data into the destination part, and this is the response, something like that. So these are the 5 key points that we need to keep in mind before writing the Python program, guys. Sounds interesting. So that's the day one. So that's what I wanted to deal with today, guys. I just don't want to take very lengthier session on the day one itself. But as I said, I don't want to get into A equal to B the day one, just like that, right? So that never helps for us to learn the Python. So that's the reason I went in a other approach. First, let's talk about what is Python, where the Python, some key terminologies, how it is being used. So then at least now you know that the very first thing to learn Python is handling the data types, correct? Understanding the data type, understanding what are the different data types that you may expect the data from the clients. Then the next step is to learn how to transform the data types. Then the next step is to understand how to perform the compute logic. Then the next step is to understand the request types. Then understanding how to give the response back to the client. If you done with all these 5 steps, that's it. You are done. You are a Python developer. Any questions, let me know, guys, or else we are good for today with this knowledge. We'll regroup tomorrow. We'll continue this discussion. And I hope you like the today's lecture and the approach that I'm going through.